I built a super functional, heavy-duty workbench. It has built-in storage, a cutout for me to work, and a sacrificial top. If you haven't seen the first part of building this workbench, I highly recommend going to do that now. Unless you like to live on the wild side, then, well, you do you. The basic structure is done, but now it's time to soup it up and add a bunch of features to take it to the next level. I'd like to use my workbench as an outfeed table for full sheets of plywood. I designed my workbench to work with the height of a saw stop, but in the meantime, I had to make it work with my current baby saw. I figured the best way is to mount it on the side with a French cleat. I built a holder for it using scrap plywood and 2x4s, making sure to leave enough clearance all around, and that the back didn't stick up higher than the table. I cut a long French cleat and attached it to the workbench kind of as low as I could. The lower it is, the more room for a larger top cleat. Now with the workbench cleat in place, I figured out exactly where the cleat needed to go on the table saw, though I placed it so the table saw sits slightly higher than the workbench. That way, wood won't catch as it slides onto the workbench. The table saw would be unstable if it was just the French cleat. There needs to be a spacer at the bottom to keep it level. I added a 2x4 from post to post. Then I added a spacer block on the table saw holder at the level of the 2x4. And just like that, it clips onto the side of the workbench and is ready to use. It's at the right height and level with the workbench. Plus, it gives an entire 8-foot table for outfeed. I added a few screws to attach the table saw to the stand. And just another plus, it's easy to slide it from side to side depending on the cut being made. Sometimes I may want it in the center, and other times it may be better near a side. I have since used it a few times, and it works great. This is a scroll saw, one of my most frequently used tools. It's great for cutting intricate curves and smaller pieces. I already mounted it to a slab for the workbench before, but the bolts were hanging out the bottom, so I just glued a bunch of scrap half-inch pieces to the bottom. I wanted to keep the scroll saw on a platform because then it's really easy to clamp anywhere on the workbench. When I was building the workbench frame, I added 4 carriage bolts around the cutout. This is so I can make it into a miter saw station. I got a few metal bars with holes, but had to enlarge the holes just a bit. I cut the bars smaller and attached them to the bolts with wing nuts. This will make it easy to swing out when in use and tuck away when not in use. Next, I needed to build the height for the miter saw. I started with one piece that fit the space, then figured out how I could get the saw surface at or slightly above the workbench height. Even though I'm setting this up now, I'm not planning on using it like this until I have a dust collection system set up. Otherwise, it would just spew dust everywhere, and that's not cool. I may utilize this cutout with the flip out bars for a removable downdraft table in the future. We'll see. Okay, I already set up a French cleat on the side for the table saw, but the French cleat can be utilized for more than just that. I want to add a large paper roll holder that can be mounted on the side so I can roll out a sheet for when a project is going to be messy. I started by sketching out and cutting 2 identical pieces for the sides. These have the French cleat built right into it, and it goes down to press into the spacer 2x4 below. The weird slot fits this bar that holds the paper roll. Now I just need to connect the 2 sides. I used 3 scrap pieces cut to the same length, then glued and screwed them to the sides. Most paper rolls are 3-ish feet wide, so I made it that wide plus some extra. I'll just need to get a few collars for the bar so it can't slide left or right and fall off. The French cleat system makes it really easy to swap from one tool to another. Pretty cool and convenient. Okay, moving on. Time to power this workbench up. I want to add some outlets so I can plug in tools wherever I'm working. I picked up a beefy electrical cord and attached it to the wall with some cable clips, bringing it down to the expansion crack in the concrete floor. I put the cable in the crack, then covered it with some puzzle mats, and the cable is pretty much unnoticeable now. I added an outlet box to the frame, then brought the extension cable to the box. I unplugged it from the wall before cutting the cable. I stripped some cables and wired in 2 other stretches of Romex for the other 2 outlets. The outlet here will be different than the others. It has 2 USB plugs integrated, so that's fun and fancy. The second outlet is to the right on the end near the barn doors. I've wired up a bunch of stuff in the past, so I'm pretty confident with my electrical skills. The third outlet is to the left under the French Cleat. This will be where I plug in the table saw. Once everything was wired up, I plugged the extension cable back in and gave it a test. My workbench is so powerful. The extension cable can just be unplugged when not in use. Now, this is what I think is the best addition to the workbench. I wanted to have a built-in seat that could slide out when I wanted to use it and slide back in if I wanted to stand up. I gathered materials not knowing if it would work, but here it goes. First thing to set is the height of the seat. Everything else is dictated off of that. I just set it at the height that was comfortable for me. I then cut my 4x4 wood supports. A short vertical piece sits on a longer horizontal piece. The horizontal piece is sized so that it brings the entire seat under the workbench, but doesn't extend out the other side. I attached the 2 with glue and the same lag screws as the rest of the workbench. The glue and screws would eventually give way after a decent amount of use, so to really strengthen it, I sandwiched it with 3/4 inch plywood. Just to make this seat even better, I added a Lazy Susan to make it swivel. The seat has holes in it already, but they didn't line up with the holes on the turntable. So I just centered it best I could and popped in some screws. Now it's time to add the drawer slides. This was a little tricky. I measured the span and cut 2 2x4s for the stationary part. For the slides, I bought very long full extension slides that can hold 150 pounds. Myself plus the weight of the seat and support is right around 150. Since they are longer, they can hold a bit more weight when not fully extended. It would have been nice to get slides with a bigger weight limit, but I couldn't find any locally. When attaching the slide to the seat, I pulled it down a bit so the bottom of the seat support won't scrape on the bench. Then when I attached it to the 2x4, I raised it up a bit for a little more clearance. It's now ready to go, so time to see if it's going to work. I brought it in place, lined it up in the center, and attached it with 4.5 inch lag screws. It looked like it was going to work. I was mostly worried that the slides would give way, but there's only one way to find out. It works, and it's comfortable. I can reach all the areas of the workbench, and I'm surrounded by work surface, so I'll be even more functional while I work. If I don't want to sit, it's easy to push the seat in and stand on a squishy mat. It seems like such a simple addition, but it's really going to make a difference in the long run. Let's talk about casters. There is a decent amount of concern that I did not add casters to the workbench. It's not that I didn't want to add casters to this. I did, and I still kind of do. But I want the legs to be the supports, not wheels. So the casters have to mount on the sides. With the tools and storage boxes loaded in the workbench, this thing is heavy. Much too heavy for some of the more commonly used casters. I'm talking like 800 pounds minimum. If I ever want to move it, which is less likely now with the extension cord, I'll probably just lift it onto dollies and roll it around. And that's it. This workbench is now ready to handle anything and everything. I have a bunch of projects in the works, and it'll be so much easier to be efficient with the building process. This is definitely a twist to any of the other workbenches out there, designed with outside-of-the-box elements to be what'll work best for me and my way of building. I am really excited to not be building on the ground anymore. Okay, that's it for now. See ya. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Just getting started. Drop it. Excuse me. Sir. Drop it. Drop it. Okay. Oh. Okay. Let go. Give it back. Thank you. Sit. Sit. Pop. Touch. Touch. Touch.